Hey, what's up guys, TechTine here and I'm back again with a brand new video. So before I begin, as always, I want to thank you all so much for watching. If you're new to the channel, don't be a stranger, make sure you leave a thumbs up. Also make sure you subscribe to the channel. So with that being said, today I'm finally going to be comparing the Samsung Galaxy A15 to the Samsung Galaxy A16. And one of the things that came to my mind when I was making this comparison is that I didn't really expect them to have as much differences as they actually do. So you may not see it if you just look at them side by side, but they do have differences that may be worth your while. So one of the things that I want to discuss first is in the design of both of these devices, beginning with the Galaxy A15 from last year. So the Galaxy A15 has this soft matte finish to it on the back. Now both of these phones are made out of plastic, so let's go ahead and get that out of the way. But yeah, so it has this soft finish to it, and the color scheme in my opinion looks a little bit cooler than the A16. So it does have this reflective color that shifts between different shades depending on the lighting that you're in. And the Galaxy A16 on the other hand has more of a glossy finish to it. I'm not really the biggest fan of glossy material because it does catch fingerprints like crazy, unlike the A15. But if you do also shine it under sunlight, you kind of get this sort of diamond pattern, which again, it looks cool, I guess, but in my opinion, the Galaxy A15 does look slightly better. So on the back of both of these phones, when we put them side by side, you will see that both of these phones have a triple camera setup, which we will have a whole segment about the camera. Stay tuned, it's going to be shown later on in the video. And the sides of the phone have very similar look to it, so the same sort of power button, volume up and down layout. I do have to say that two things. One, the Galaxy A16 is a little bit thinner than the Galaxy A15, so the A15 comes in at 8.4 millimeters versus the 7.9 millimeters that is found on the Galaxy A16. The A16 is a little bit larger than the A15, so the A15 comes in at 6.5 inches versus the 6.7 inches on the Galaxy A16. Now, if you look at the bottom, you will see another sort of major difference. The A15 does provide us with a headphone jack, and unfortunately, and this may disappoint certain demographics, but the A16 ends up losing the headphone jack. I don't know how much that is going to be a deal breaker for you. Now, both of these sides are also made out of plastic. It's a very familiar design on both of these devices. Not too much has changed. I guess the headphone jack can be counted as a major change if you are that type of person to use a headphone jack, but other than that, very subtle changes that make these phones slightly different. Now, in my personal opinion, like I said, I do kind of lean a little bit more towards the Galaxy A15's design just because I like the matte look and the sort of change in the shade of the color versus the Galaxy A16's kind of glossy finish, which again, I'm not the biggest fan because of how much fingerprints it catches, and it's really harder to clean than the Galaxy A15. So yeah, that's basically the story behind the design of both of these phones. And the display on both of these phones are extremely similar, other than, again, very subtle changes. So the Galaxy A15 has a 6.5 inches 1080p Super AMOLED display that does support 90Hz, and it also has 800 nits of peak brightness. It also has 84.3% screen to body ratio. Now, some people did complain about the kind of way that Samsung took around the bezels on the A15. Unfortunately, they do come back in the Galaxy A16. So speaking of which, it does have a slightly larger display at 6.7 inches. Again, the same 1080p display, the same Super AMOLED technology, the same high peak brightness of 800 nits. However, slightly smaller bezels at 86% screen to body ratio. Now, if we put both of these displays side by side, it's extremely difficult for us to, one, tell that these bezels are actually smaller, and two, it's actually really difficult to tell these displays apart. And so basically that means that if you're coming from the Galaxy A15 thinking that the A16 is going to have a dramatically better display, yeah, you're going to be disappointed. Now, what you will not be disappointed in the best feature of both of these phones, which in my opinion is the display. So an extremely solid display on both of these phones. They both get a thumbs up in the display department. Super AMOLED display, 1080p, 90Hz refresh rate. So it checks all the boxes of actually a good display, a better display than a lot of phones that have a similar price tag to them. So I want to speak on the performance of the Galaxy A16 and the Galaxy A15 5G. And in my opinion, this is where I say one of them kind of goes ahead and does a better job than the other. And thankfully that is the Galaxy A16, but let's break it down a little bit more. So the Samsung Galaxy A15 does have the following specs. You get a MediaTek processor. It's the MediaTek Helio G99 based on a 6nm architecture. You also get the Mali G57. Now the base model, which is this phone here, is 128GB of storage and 4GB of RAM. And I do have to say that unfortunately the performance on the A15 was a very disappointing part of this phone. It did not really perform as well, and I get the value behind the price point, but yeah, this phone was extremely slow, and over time it did get progressively slower and slower and slower to where it was kind of starting to get annoying. But essentially, as soon as you take this phone out of the box, the performance on it will be fine, and opening up apps can struggle from time to time, so it is slower than a lot of phones at this price point. I have to say that even the A14 from, you can say at this point, 2 years ago, was slightly faster than the A15. Loading up web pages, going through social media, doing your daily tasks, it was sluggish and not up to par in my opinion for Samsung standards. And if we look at the benchmark scores, they also kind of show why the performance is low, and I'm being tough on it just because of how good the Galaxy A16 did bring some improvements. So 698 for your single core and 1882 for your multi-core. And so the Galaxy A16 brings in some noticeable improvement, specifically in the single multi-core scores, and also in other improvements as far as opening up your daily tasks, things like that. But the A16 does have the following specs, and unfortunately I don't have the base version. This is the higher end version, you can think of it that way. So this comes in with the Exynos 1330 based on a 5nm architecture. I believe the US version, which is not yet out, will come with a MediaTek Dimensity processor, so when that comes out I will compare it. Now you get the Mali G68 on this version, as well as 8GB of RAM and 256GB of storage. And your benchmark scores gives you a 965 on your single core and 2079 on your multi-core, so definitely a dramatically better performing device than the previous generation. And I did notice that it opens up apps much faster, browsing the web is much smoother, going through social media, doing your daily tasks is a much better, it's a little bit more capable than the previous generation. Even when it comes to kind of playing lighter title games, I didn't really have a big issue when it comes to the performance of this phone. Now again, I do have to stress that this is the 8GB and 256GB storage Exynos processor versus the MediaTek. So I will be making some sort of comparison between the A16's MediaTek processor when that comes out, so stay tuned for that. Now, I want to talk about the camera system on both of these phones, and unfortunately, they're both equally disappointing. They both have very similar camera system, main sensor 50 megapixel, 5 megapixel ultra wide, and a macro sensor. The Galaxy A15 in these photos produces, again, similar pictures to the Galaxy A16. Not much has changed as far as the quality. I will say that the A15 does produce more warmer tones than the Galaxy A16, which kind of tones it down a little bit and actually produces more cooler tone shots. Now, if that makes a big difference to you, you can kind of adjust that later on in an edit. But yeah, they're both equally disappointing. I do want to just bring out one fact, that the Galaxy A16 does have one thing that is different, which is the addition of an electronic image stabilization versus the Galaxy A15, which when you record video, you don't have electronic image stabilization. They both do shoot videos at 1080p, and I do have full camera reviews on both of these phones linked in the description below, so if you want to check those out separately, you can. But here's my bottom line conclusion for both of these devices. I have to say that if you have the Galaxy A15, I find it kind of difficult for you to go out and spend $200 or $250 on the Galaxy A16. You might like getting additional storage and additional RAM that might help you, in which in performance the A16 does beat out the A15 by a mile. So if you're looking strictly for performance, yeah, I guess that might be a route to take, and I'll go ahead and upgrade your phone that way. But I wouldn't just jump the gun and upgrade to the A16 just because of it. It's clearly that the A16 is better, but the changes on the A15 versus the A16 are still, in my opinion, very minor. So with that being said, take that information and do with it as you wish. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I will thank you. I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will definitely catch you guys in the next one. Thank you all for watching.